A cultura é um dos mais preciosos instrumentos de democracia. É um canal de expressão plural que permite a convivência de diferentes vozes, histórias e visões de mundo. E por isso a cultura, tal qual a democracia, deve ser defendida e fortalecida. Essa é a função da Lei Rouanet, a principal política pública de incentivo à cultura brasileira. Com ela, perseguimos a missão de assegurar o acesso democrático à produção e à difusão cultural. Ao longo de mais de 3 décadas, a Rouanet permitiu que inúmeras iniciativas culturais, antes inviáveis, ganhassem o mundo. Revelou histórias, preservou tradições e transformou vidas. Lei Rouanet, há 33 anos, tornando a cultura brasileira mais plural, acessível e democrática.
Casal de dançarinos e órgãos diferentes. Uma banda orquestrada para de tocar. Logos, Lei Rouanet, Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução.
Onde tem cultura, a Vale está. Um poder criativo que nasce dos palcos, orquestras, das artes, das ruas e dos museus. Na valorização das diversas identidades brasileiras e na preservação de memórias. É valorizando a cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos. Instituto Cultural Vale.
Inhaderu deixou pobrezinho no sítio, não deixou por escrito, não deixou dinheiro para nós. Aqui eu tenho 2 vezes no ano minha festa, em Mogarai. Batizar semente para plantar. Semente que veio, Inhaderu mandou para nós, colheita de planta, outra festa, mês de janeiro. Aí o pajé vai dar o nome indígena. Se não tem esse milho indígena, ele não tem como dar nome indígena para criança. A terra não é do Juruá. A terra é nossa. Inhaderu deixou para nós.
Ministério da Cultura e a Associação Casa Azul apresentam 23ª FLIP, Festa Literária Internacional de Paraty. A FLIP conta com o benefício da Lei Federal de Incentivo à Cultura, Lei Rouanet, PRONAC 235060, e possui acessibilidade para pessoas com deficiências física, visual e auditiva. Tem patrocínio Jequitibá do Nubank. Patrocínio Figueira da Vale. Patrocínio Guapuruvu do Itaú e da Motiva, por meio do seu instituto. Patrocínio Cedro do Sesc, da MAC Móveis e de U Globo. Patrocínio Araribá, da Globo Livros. Apoio institucional da Prefeitura de Paraty, Governo do Estado do Rio de Janeiro, IFAM, Instituto do Patrimônio Histórico e Artístico Nacional e Museu do Território. É uma criação e realização Associação Casa Azul e Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução. FLIP, o encontro da literatura com a cidade.
A gente vai ter agora a mesa 11, e eu queria, antes de tudo, agradecer o apoio do ICL, o Instituto Conhecimento Liberta, e as editoras do Ilan Pappe aqui no Brasil, que são a Tabla e a Elefante. Ele vai autografar os livros depois da fala, ali na livraria da Flip, e vocês podem mandar perguntas pelos papeizinhos que a nossa equipe recolhe. Decidir fazer essa mesa foi talvez a decisão mais importante que a gente fez como curadoria. Uma festa literária tem que celebrar a existência dos livros, da cultura, da arte, da literatura, da poesia, mas é impossível manter a nossa alegria viva enquanto a gente assiste um território ser dizimado por uma política de Estado que não se... Obrigada, gente. Não em nosso nome. Para mediar, bom, eu vou pular tudo, vocês já entenderam. Para mediar essa mesa, eu vou chamar a historiadora Arlene Clemesha, outra pensadora que é fundamental para entender esse conflito. Arlene.
Obrigada. Obrigada. Chamamos agora Ilan Pappe.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bom, sejam muito bem-vindos a essa maravilhosa sessão, com essa pessoa maravilhosa que se encontra aqui ao meu lado. Queria, antes de mais nada, agradecer imensamente a organização da Flip, a bravura, a sua resistência, a sua postura, a sua coragem, de ter essa mesa, de poder receber aqui Ilan Pappe, e de termos essa honra, esse privilégio. Ilan Pappe é nascido em Haifa, e hoje professor na Universidade de Exeter, depois de ter se formado em Oxford e ter muitas passagens por sua vida, ter se formado em Oxford, onde hoje, na Inglaterra, é professor em Oxford. Desculpa, em Exeter. E eu gostaria de, bom, além de mencionar os 26 livros publicados, 4 dos quais já estão em português, e em 17 outros idiomas também, eu gostaria de passar logo para o Ilan Pappe nos contar um pouco, se possível, professor Ilan Pappe, nos contar um pouco, e seja muito bem-vindo, nos contar um pouco sobre como que o autor Ilan Pappe chegou, como que o homem, a pessoa Ilan Pappe, nos ajuda a entender a formação do autor Ilan Pappe, esse que tem 26 livros publicados em 17 idiomas, pelo menos, 4 dos quais já estão em português. Por favor.
Yes, thank you. It's great to see you all. I want to thank the translators. I want to thank the organizers. As you might have guessed, there was quite a pressure to prevent me from speaking to you tonight. So I'm very glad that the organizers were not giving in to pressure so that we can dialogue on Palestine in a free, democratic way. As for your question, I think it's important. I don't know how many people are familiar with my biography. I was born in Israel, in Haifa, a few years after 1948. And I grew up in a very conventional Israeli way, so to speak. I had a conventional Israeli childhood, boyhood, and more or less until my mid-20s, I was very much part of the same ideology, the same narrative, the same Israeli way of looking at the reality, whether the reality of the past or the reality of the present. In the 1980s, I became interested in history as a profession. And it looked to me very natural as an historian at the beginning of his career to look at the history of my own country. And I thought that the most important year in the history of Israel was 1948. And whatever I found in my research contradicted dramatically what I learned in school, what I heard from my parents, what I heard from my professors in the university. I was exposed to a very different story of Israel and Palestine than I was used to as an ordinary person or citizen of Israel. And then I decided to continue my studies outside of Israel. And a lot of things that you see from the outside, sometimes you cannot see from the inside. So leaving Israel for a while and continuing my education as an historian outside the country allowed me to see things differently. It also allowed me, which is the first, was very important, to meet Palestinian historians on equal footing, without the power relations that you have between Israelis and Palestinians in Israel, including in the Israeli academia. And that also opened up for me a perspective that I was not familiar with before. What I did not realize, I must admit, that when I came back to Israel, I did not realize that challenging the historical narrative of your own state would be regarded as treason. This was a shock for me. I thought, I really was naive. I thought people would say, oh, great, you looked at the archives, you did the proper research, you are finding things about Israel, about 1948, that we didn't know about or nobody wrote about. And I really thought I would be welcomed with open arms. But the more I wrote about it, the more I talked about it, it was very clear to me that I had to make a decision. Either I continue with my own truth, my own understanding of what happened in the past and its relevance for the present and the future, and by that risking the membership, my membership, if you want, in the tribe, in the nation, losing my contacts with friends, with family, not to mention with the academic community, or I give in to the pressure and I write what people would like me to write, and then I can continue my normal life as an Israeli Jewish citizen. So I took a decision to continue with my own truth and realizing what the price would be. And eventually, because of that, I was expelled from my university, and I had to move to England. Also, there were a lot of death threats and so on. But there is a moment, and with this I would end this long answer, there is a moment where you look back and you say, I'm not going back to where I was, I'm continuing. So it's a journey. It's a journey that included, first of all, love of history. Secondly, very keen interest in the history of your own country. But it was also a moral journey, not just a professional journey. It was a moral journey in the sense that you belong to a certain ideology, to a certain state, to a certain group, and you found out that the things that this state had done in the past, was doing in the present, are unacceptable to you on a moral basis, and that you have a responsibility because these terrible things are being done in your name. And that's why I felt I should continue to write history books, challenge the Israeli version of history, and teach as much as I can the next generation about what happened really in Palestine and in Israel, and why is it important to know what happened in order to understand what goes on today and what the future might hold for us.
De fato, é uma lição na própria pele daquela frase muito citada por Said, né? Said dizia que nenhum povo gosta de olhar para o seu passado e enxergar males, enxergar problemas. E, no entanto, a coragem de fazer isso determina realmente uma trajetória e o resultado dela que estamos vendo. Eu gostaria de passar, então, à segunda pergunta. Nesse livro, que agora a editora Elefante está lançando, A Maior Prisão do Mundo, de modo muito premonitório, a Ilan Pappe diz na introdução que o projeto dessa maior prisão do mundo, que foi o projeto israelense para os territórios palestinos a partir de 1967, que esse projeto de prisão a céu aberto e prisão de segurança máxima, no caso da faixa de Gaza, principalmente, esse projeto ele respondia a uma determinação ideológica sionista de criação de um Estado judeu, com as suas implicações de limpeza étnica, principalmente. E, de modo muito premonitório, então, você diz que apenas o futuro nos irá dizer se nós iremos para um lado de expansão de direitos humanos e, portanto, de resolução dessa questão, dessa prisão vigente pela via dos direitos humanos, ou se a história nos levará para um futuro de limpeza étnica cada vez mais aprofundada, porque esse é o projeto de controle populacional e pelo motivo pelo qual ele foi erguido. Portanto, a minha pergunta, a partir dessa visão muito aguda da realidade e das possibilidades futuras, a minha pergunta é: como é que a história pode ajudar a entender o que acontece hoje, né, e o atual e horroroso, pavoroso genocídio que acontece hoje impacta na sua visão da história, né, da Palestina, talvez em maneiras que sequer você mesmo poderia prever?
Yes, I'm reminded of the comment made by the United Nations General Secretary Guterres after the 7th of October 2023. If you remember, he condemned what the Hamas did on that day, but he immediately added and said we have to understand that what happened on the 7th of October had a context. And the Israeli reaction to his idea that you should understand the context and not just condemn what happened was they demanded that he would be sacked and immediately called him anti-Semitic and supporter of terror. For Israel, it was very important, official Israel, that there would be no context to what happened. So it's very important to, first of all, say that if we insist, as I do, and I know that you do as well, that we should tell the history of the place in order to understand both what happened on the 7th of October and what happened after the 7th of October, when we are saying this, we are immediately in direct confrontation with Israeli propaganda and Israeli lobby. It's very important to understand it. I don't know how it is in Brazil, but I can tell you that in places such as Germany, for instance, university managements ask the professors not to mention the word context when they talk about Palestine because it makes the Israeli lobby in Germany very angry. But we will today be revolutionaries, and we will not be afraid of the Israeli lobby, and we will talk about the context. It's very important. And the context goes, there are two kinds of context which I think are relevant to your question. One goes back in time to the very beginning of the Zionist project in Palestine. And one goes a bit to a more recent period, which is covered by my book, The Big Prison on Earth. Now, if I'm talking about the long kind of perspective, I don't know how many people realize that the Zionist project, the idea that Palestine, that was an Arab country in the middle of the Arab world, the idea that that country should become a Jewish state was a European project, long before it was a Jewish project. In fact, it was an evangelical Christian project, because the evangelical Christian, not all of them, but the important part of the evangelical Christians in Europe and in America believed that the creation of a Jewish state will bring back Jesus Christ, resurrect the dead, begin the end of time. I don't have to tell you, you are very lucky in Brazil. 30% of your population believes in this bullshit. So I don't have to really to explain to you too much about it. But in any case, this was important because people who believed in it were prime ministers of Britain, presidents of the United States, very important bankers, financial people. So this was an elite that believed that getting the Jews to Palestine is part of a divine scheme. We have to remember this because it's still relevant today. I just mentioned the Christian Zionists in your country, but of course they are mostly important in the United States in influencing American policy. What is unique about this idea was that the people who conceived it were really anti-Semitic. They hated Jews. They wanted the Jews out of Europe, but they were very happy that in the same process they might get back the only Jew they wanted, Jesus Christ. So this is something that is very important to realize. Of course, they were not the only ones who thought that since Europe is unable to deal with its racism towards Jews, this was the main problem. Europe was unable to accept the Jewish population of Europe as equal. And this was the case until the Holocaust, and during the Holocaust, of course. The situation changed after the Holocaust, but up to 1945, Europeans of all kinds, religious and non-religious, imperialists, capitalists, Jews and non-Jews, said Europe is unable to solve its Jewish problem. So what is the solution? We will build a European Jewish state in the heart of the Arab world, at the expense of the Palestinians, and that should solve the Jewish problem of Europe. Now, of course, it didn't solve anything. Anti-Semitism in Europe is still there. The idea of imposing a European state on the Arab world can only be done by force and against the will of the people. And some of what we see today goes back, first of all, to this very basic problem. You cannot impose a European state on the Arab world because Europe doesn't know how to deal with its Jewish population. The more recent context, which I think is very important, is the fact that after the early creation of the Zionist movement in Palestine, the Zionist movement developed as a movement that nowadays, in academic terms, we call a settler colonial movement. You should also be quite familiar in Brazil with settler colonialism. You have your own chapter on settler colonialism, but I want to be nice to you, so I won't talk about settler colonialism in Brazil, but only in Palestine. And Zionism became a classical case of settler colonialism. The difference between colonialists and settler colonialists is that the colonialists want to exploit the native people. The settler colonialists want to get rid of the indigenous people, to eliminate them. And Zionism became a classical movement of settler colonialism once it began to build the infrastructure for a state in Palestine under the British rule in the 1920s and the 1930s. And in 1948, the Zionist movement had an historical opportunity to translate the idea of eliminating the native into a practical operation, which I called in my book in 2007, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And there is a direct connection, and I'm sure we will talk about it as well a bit later, but there's a direct connection between the attempt of the Zionist movement in 1948 to expel as many Palestinians as possible from Palestine, because they believed that this was the only way to have a proper, ironically, democratic Western Jewish state. You needed to have a Jewish majority if you wanted a democracy. But the Jews were a minority in 1948, so they expelled as many Palestinians as they wanted. The direct connection between 48 and Gaza is that there was no Gaza Strip before 1948. Gaza was a very nice town with a lot of villages around it, on the road between Egypt and Turkey, very cosmopolitical, where Jews, Muslims, and Christians lived together. Israel created the Gaza Strip. If you look at the map, you can see the strip, the Gaza Strip. Israel created it because it looked for a place into which to push hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that it didn't want to have in the Jewish state. So they created a mega refugee camp called the Gaza Strip. And 70% of the people of Gaza today are descendants of these people who were expelled from Palestine into this little strip that is called the Gaza Strip. So you have here another connection. And in fact, quite a few of the Jewish places, or the Israeli places that were attacked on the 7th of October were built on the ruins of villages, Palestinian villages, that were expelled in 1948 into the Gaza Strip. It doesn't justify what they did in the Israeli kibbutzim and towns and so on, but it explains that there is a sense of return when they went into these settlements. And finally, as I write in my book, The Biggest Prison on Earth, especially the people of Gaza, but not only the people of Gaza, lived under conditions that are not, I don't know of any other group of people who were subjected to such a regime for such a long time after the Second World War. Especially in the Gaza Strip, they lived in really a prison from 1967 onwards. Israel controlled everything in their life. They were like inmates in a big prison. It became even worse, of course, after they resisted the prison model through the attacks of the Hamas on Israel, and then it became even worse than a prison. It became much more like a death camp than a prison. And if you think about it, half of the population of Gaza in 2023 are below 21 years old, which means the only reality they know is to live under the siege, the blockade, and they were 4 times attacked from the air by Air Force, by artillery, by tanks, by Navy ships. Now, I do not know how many of you experienced a 1 ton bomb falling on your house or even falling in a house near you. I only once experienced it. And I'm traumatized from this for life. The young people of Gaza have experienced it many, many times. Israel dropped more bombs on the Gaza Strip since 2007 than the Allies dropped on Germany during the Second World War. And they live in this small strip under these kinds of conditions. I challenge everyone to show me a similar experience by another people for such a long time. So these are the contexts. So you have this very long one, you have the one that begins in 67, the occupation, and then you have the one that begins in 2007. If you don't know that history, you wouldn't understand the brutality of the Hamas in 2007, and you wouldn't understand the even worse brutality of Israel in reaction after October 2023.
E, ao mesmo tempo em que os acontecimentos se desdobram tão rapidamente, e talvez exatamente por esse motivo, Ilan, take some water, please.
No, I have.
Ok. E exatamente porque os acontecimentos se desdobram tão rapidamente, talvez até mesmo por esse motivo, a impressão que temos é que a historiografia palestina muda muito rapidamente. Debaixo dos nossos olhos, as inovações, as descobertas de arquivo, a construção da narrativa, aliás, de uma narrativa que Elias Huri, certa vez, disse que não existe. Né? Ele dizia, a narrativa palestina não existe. E por quê? Porque ela está sendo construída. E por que é tão difícil construir a narrativa ou a história palestina? Porque os palestinos estão resistindo, estão lutando para sobreviver. Como que você escreve a sua história enquanto você luta para sobreviver? E Elias, justamente Elias dizia isso tudo, e também nos ajuda, através da literatura, e você agora, através da história, queria trazer sua opinião, quais são as evidências, talvez, mais agudas desse rápido desenvolvimento da historiografia palestina. Para tomar alguns exemplos, campos de concentração existem desde 48. Em 48 foram criados campos de concentração e Gaza chegou, ela mesma, a um estágio de ser um grande campo a céu aberto. A Cisjordânia, o modelo para lidar com ela, como diz o seu livro, explica o seu livro, é também de uma prisão, de um modelo de controle prisional. Né? Outro exemplo, além do campo de concentração que existiu e pouco se sabe, está se descobrindo cada vez mais, é o próprio sistema de apartheid, que também não se falava muito sobre apartheid, hoje se fala muito, mas o apartheid também vem da década de 50. Portanto, na sua visão de historiador, o que você pode dizer sobre esse rápido desenvolvimento da história palestina, da historiografia palestina, da narrativa palestina?
Yes, I think that time is very important for historians. I mean, when time is moving, you have a better perspective. And I think now we can see much clearer how the Israeli project of controlling the Palestinians and dealing with the Palestinians evolved over the years. Because we have to remember, when the early Zionists came in 1882, the early Zionists came, they were a small minority, a very small minority, and they didn't have the capacity to get rid of the Palestinians. They already talked about getting rid of the Palestinians. They already drew paintings where the Palestinian villages miraculously disappeared from the landscape that the early Zionist painters drew of Palestine, which was very ominous for the Palestinians. But they didn't have the power to do this. And in 1948, they had the power to expel half of the Palestinian population, destroy half of the Palestinian villages. 500 out of 1,000 villages were destroyed, totally wiped out in 1948, and on the ruins of the villages, they built Jewish settlements or they planted trees and created recreational forests. But they didn't complete the ethnic cleansing because half of the Palestinians still stayed in Palestine. Half were expelled and half stayed. And those who were expelled remained in refugee camps near the borders of Israel. So they were still present, maybe not in historical Palestine, but very near to historical Palestine. Every settler colonial movement, we understand it now, wants more territory without the native people. And in 1948, because of all kinds of consideration, I would not go into it, Israel did not take the whole of historical Palestine. I already explained why they didn't take what today is the Gaza Strip, because they needed a mega refugee camp. But they also did not occupy what became the West Bank. The West Bank, by the way, also did not exist before 1948. It was organically part of historical Palestine. Israel had a secret agreement with Jordan that in return for a very limited Jordanian action against Israel, Israel would allow Jordan to take part of historical Palestine, and that historical part was called the West Bank. But the Israeli generals of 1948, who became the leaders in 1967, felt that it was a mistake not to take the whole of historical Palestine. So in 1967, they added to Israel the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. But they had the similar problem of every settler colonial movement. If you take more territory, you have more unwanted population. So they expelled almost 1 million Palestinians in 1948, but they added nearly 2 million Palestinians in 1967 because they wanted more territory. As I show in the book, The Biggest Prison on Earth, they seriously thought that they might be able to do in 1967 what they did in 1948, namely to take the West Bank, to take the Gaza Strip, and to expel the Palestinians. But it was a different period, and they decided eventually not to repeat the ethnic cleansing in 1967. So they had a real problem. They had all the territory of Palestine they always wanted to create the new Jewish state, but they had more unwanted population. So you can see from the perspective of history that what they decided to do, that if they cannot expel 2 million Palestinians in 1967, they can put them in kind of mega prisons so that they would not be included in the demography of the Jewish state. And this is, I don't know how many of you have been there, how many some of you are coming from there, but this is it's like a terrible science fiction film. This idea that you can take a whole area and treat it like a prison. There are about 150,000 Israelis who are daily involved in policing millions of Palestinians. They have absolute power over 2 million Palestinians. They can decide to destroy a house, to throw out people from their home, to not to allow people to go to their work, not to go to the university. And this is a daily experience from 1967 until today. Because that was the alternative to expulsion, is to enclave the people, to close them down. Now, what we have in that history that we have to recognize is that the Palestinians were not passive in front of that reality. So the Palestinians revolted, resisted this kind of inhuman imposition. And there was the first uprising in 1987, the first Intifada. Then there was the second uprising in 2000, the second Intifada. And in many ways, 7th of October 2023 is the third uprising. What is incredible, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later, that still today, in most academic and journalistic and political centers of the West, and maybe in part of the global South as well, the Palestinian resistance to being treated like inmates in a prison, to be treated without any human rights and civil rights, their resistance to this very day is regarded by so many governments around the world and so many academics and so many journalists as terrorism. It is a classical anti-colonialist movement. And we should insist of teaching the Palestinian resistance as anti-colonialist in our universities. We should insist that our media, in particular you media, should not talk about the Palestinians as terrorists, but anti-colonialists who are fighting for their life against an ideology that wants to destroy them. This is very, very important. And we realize it, you know, this history becomes clearer to us as we move in time, because two things became clear in recent years from our research and our work, and mostly by our Palestinian colleagues who added such important contribution to our understanding. I think two important conclusions come from that history, which I think are worth looking at. From the very beginning that Europe decided that Palestine should not be an Arab state, should not be part of the Arab world, should not be part of the Muslim world, from that very moment until today, until the second, is it second, first? Never mind. Until August, I'm not good with dates. And as is the 1st of August 2025, until today, from the very beginning of 1882, nobody asked the Palestinians what they want. This is incredible. This is 140 years of people being colonized, people being occupied, people being ethnically cleansed, people who are now being genocided, and still today, like in the very beginning of the project of Zionism, nobody asked them what do they think about the idea that their country would be the solution for anti-Semitism in Europe. This is incredible. Incredible. And when they say, okay, so the Jews have arrived, we'll accept them. But then they learn that these Zionists are not interested in living alongside the Palestinians. They want to live instead of the Palestinians. There is a very interesting correspondence between Martin Buber, who was, I don't know if many of you heard of Martin Buber, who was a great Jewish philosopher who immigrated to Palestine in the 1930s. He was really a big name. And the Zionist leaders wanted Buber because he had very good relationship with Mahatma Gandhi in India. They wanted him to convince Gandhi to support the Zionist project in public. And Gandhi wrote back to Buber, I would have supported the idea of the Jews in Palestine if I would have been convinced that the Jews who arrived from Europe want to live alongside the Palestinians. But from what I understand, he already understood it in 1934. From what I understand, you want to replace, you want to displace the Palestinians. I will never support such a project. This is why until today we don't have a street named after Gandhi in Israel. Not even a small street, not even stairs, not even a small piazza. Gandhi does not exist in the Israeli urban scenery. Yeah.
E entre os vários pontos que você tocou, né, dos palestinos resistindo à sua realidade, mas a sua voz não sendo ouvida, né, isso nos leva a uma grande questão dentro da compreensão dessa trajetória de 140 anos de colonização sionista da Palestina, que é a compreensão sobre 1948, sobre a Nakba, né? E essa compreensão da Nakba passou por vários momentos e vários debates e várias fases. O Ali Khalidi, na década de 50, um grande historiador palestino que ele pesquisou em arquivos palestinos, como o arquivo pessoal do Rajamin al-Husseini, em arquivos britânicos, como as gravações radiofônicas britânicas, e provou com essas pesquisas em arquivo, trabalho historiográfico, que houve uma expulsão em 48, mas a sua voz não foi ouvida, né? A voz do palestino, a voz da vítima. Foi necessário, em 1980, que o movimento historiográfico do qual Ilan Pappe foi um dos grandes expoentes, a chamada nova historiografia israelense, foi necessário que ela fosse aos arquivos israelenses demonstrar, através de arquivos israelenses, que houve uma expulsão em 1948. E aí o mundo passou a aceitar, sim, que houve uma expulsão, que não foi um êxodo voluntário, uma saída voluntária. Mas, mesmo assim, isso deu origem a um grande debate, né? Com alguns dizendo que, bom, houve uma expulsão, como, por exemplo, Benny Morris, né, dizendo, sim, houve uma expulsão, mas foi resultado da guerra, não foi intencional, né? Outros dizendo, não, houve uma expulsão, ela foi planejada. E Ilan Pappe, num artigo no Institute for Palestine Studies, dizendo que é bem ao contrário, né? Na verdade, houve uma expulsão, e mais do que isso, a guerra ela foi travada para expulsar. E esse foi o grande passo, ou estou errada, desse debate que eu consigo perceber na visão do Ilan Pappe. Alguns autores palestinos mesmos, como Adel Mana, diriam, bom, mas qual a diferença, afinal de contas? Porque, para o palestino, ele foi expulso. Se houve uma intenção de expulsar, ou se não houve uma intenção de expulsar, qual é a diferença, afinal de contas? E é isso que eu queria ouvir de você, Ilan Pappe. Qual é a diferença da gente entender que houve um planejamento e uma intenção de expulsar? Isso é importante, afinal de contas?
Yes, it's very important, because first of all, quite a lot of people, even people who sometimes support the Palestinians, say, the Palestinians made a mistake in 1947. The United Nations offered the partition of Palestine to an Arab state and a Jewish state. The Jews accepted this solution, and the Palestinians rejected it, and that's why the Palestinians became refugees. So the intention is important, because it means that even if the Palestinians would have accepted the partition plan, there's a very good reason to think that they would have been expelled anyway, because of what I call the DNA of this settler colonial movement. You have to get rid of the Palestinians. So the intention is very important, because it is not something that belongs just to 1948. This is a structure of history. It belongs to all, or it informs, not belongs, it informs all the Israeli actions in 1948 and after 1948. So I think it is very important to understand that the Palestinians became refugees because of a systematic plan to get rid of them. And the reason that Palestinians were not all of them expelled was not because the intention was to leave them there, but because there was a limit to what the Israeli army in 1948 could do and could not do. And that's why some Palestinians remained in Palestine. That's the first reason that it is very important. The second reason has to do with the reaction of the world to the expulsion of the Palestinians. Ethnic cleansing, let's just for one moment say exactly what ethnic cleansing is. Ethnic cleansing is an operation by a state or a movement to get rid of people because of who they are. Because of who they are, not because of what they did. and it is regarded as a crime against humanity in international law. Now, in 1948, a lot of important people in the world knew exactly what Israel was doing to the Palestinians. It was not a secret that Israel has massively expelled the Palestinians. It was also not a secret that Israel did it as part of its ideology. But the world, and we should talk mainly about the Western world, because in 1948, a lot of the world was still colonized. So the Western world said, you know, 3 years after the Holocaust, we are not going to blame a Jewish state of a crime against humanity. So we will accept, we will tolerate what Israel did to the Palestinians. Why did they say it? Not just because they didn't want to blame a Jewish state after the Holocaust. That was one of the reasons. But it was also an Orientalist, Islamophobic, Arabophobic kind of idea. The Arabs are not as important as the Jews. The Arabs are not as important as the Europeans. So if the victims are Palestinians, it's not like what would have happened if the victims were Jews or Europeans. It made it very easy, because I found out in my research that every government in the West knew exactly what was going on. Their own people told them, listen, the Israelis are expelling people, they are massacring, I'm talking about 1948, yes? They are massacring people, they are expelling people, they are wiping out villages. What are we going to do? And the message was from the governments, let them do this. As one of the politicians in the West said it, we are witnessing a small injustice that will correct a much bigger injustice. So the whole mentality of the West was that the Palestinians, and this is true today, the Palestinians have to pay the price for Europe's anti-Semitism. For most people in the world, that should sound unacceptable, even illogical, even impractical. So how can you turn an impractical idea into what we have today, the state of Israel that commits genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza? The only way you can do it is by force. You create a very powerful global alliance that disregards the moral issue, that disregards the practicalities, and gives Israel the weapons, the financial support, the diplomatic support through vetoes in the United Nations, and then an impossible project becomes a possible project. But it will not be forever. I'm sure about that.
E na sua resposta, e mostrando a importância dessa distinção, dessa percepção, na importância como essa percepção, então, lança luz sobre a dinâmica colocada no território, isso também explica por que a historiografia chegou a uma ideia da Nakba como sendo um processo contínuo. Ou seja, a Nakba não acabou em 48, ela continua até os dias de hoje, e justamente essa engrenagem que está colocada, está posta em movimento. E você falou que as lideranças mundiais em 48 sabiam, ignoraram e deixaram acontecer. Isso parece tão familiar com o que está acontecendo hoje. Como que as lideranças mundiais estão deixando acontecer o que está acontecendo hoje. Por onde você consegue, na sua visão de historiador, de pessoa que está envolvida há tanto tempo na pesquisa profunda da história palestina, da questão palestina, por onde poderá vir a mudança? Algo que possa mudar esse cenário e trazer um pouco mais de perspectiva de terminar essa história. E eu quero só lembrar uma coisa também, que Ilan Pappe, nesse mesmo livro, além de tantos outros, escreve que não se trata de demonizar o que está acontecendo, demonizar o povo de Israel, o israelense, o judeu israelense. Trata-se de entender essas engrenagens e entender como muitas delas passam por uma burocracia extrema. E essa burocracia é uma das grandes responsáveis também. Pois bem, e essa burocracia mundial? Você consegue vislumbrar algum tipo de mudança, por onde haver uma mudança?
Yes, first of all, you're right. This is not demonization of Israel or the Israelis. It's I hope, a very realistic analysis of what is wrong with the whole idea of the Jewish state at the heart of the Arab world that believes that the only way to succeed is by eliminating the Palestinians. Yes, Israel, I was born in Israel, I'm an Israeli Jew, and I know also about the achievements of Israel, cultural achievements, high-tech achievements, medical achievements. This is not mutually exclusive, unfortunately. But you cannot bring all these achievements, including the fact that I speak Hebrew, I dream in Hebrew, which is another Zionist success. You cannot put all these achievements and compare them to the price, not only of something that happened many years ago. Maybe with this we could have lived, something that happened many years ago. But with the price that Palestinians pay every day, including today, and they will pay tomorrow and the day after. That is something that shouldn't be too complicated to understand, that the two things are not mutually exclusive. And this comes back to your question, really. When people ask me, what did surprise you on the 7th of October and after the 7th of October? I said, sadly, I was not surprised by the Hamas violence. And sadly, I was not surprised by the Israeli violence. But I was surprised by the European indifference. I was really surprised. I thought this would be too much for them to continue to give Israel impunity and would do something much more significant. And I was surprised. And then I had to analyze, why did the Europeans and the West continue to support Israel despite the very clear scenes we have from Gaza? This is the most televised genocide we ever had in history. And that also connects to the future. So the first, as I explained in my first answer, one of the first reasons that particularly Europe is unwilling to treat Israel the same way, for instance, as it treats Russia after it invaded the Ukraine, is because Israel is part of the Western European world, in its own eyes and in the eyes of the Europeans. So if you criticize Israel, if you punish Israel, you punish part of the West. It's not like punishing Serbia or punishing Russia, or of course punishing Iran or North Korea. This is punishing part of our own body. So they find it very difficult to do it because they will have to admit that they are part of the problem, that they keep thinking about themselves as being part of the solution. But they're not part of the solution. The Europeans are part of the problem. And unless Europe solves its own issues, including racism, not just against Jews, against everyone else, it will not be able to play a constructive role in ending the violence in Palestine. There is another problem here that I think you are familiar in Brazil and some other places. Unfortunately, to have a political elite that would have the courage to take the necessary action, and everybody knows what the necessary action is, it's not a secret. for such a Western elite, whether in America or in the United States or in Europe or in some countries in the global south, in order for such political elites to take the necessary action, and as I say, we all know what the action has to be, and they can do it and stop not only the genocide, they can really create the conditions for a much better future for everyone who lives between the river and the sea and make them all free people. They know what they have to do, but for that they need moral courage. And moral courage is something that most politicians don't have. Unfortunately. Unfortunately. And this, on the one hand, makes me pessimistic, but also optimistic. Because I do think that we all need our politicians to be of a higher caliber. In so many places in the world, politics became a career, a profession, not a vocation. And that's a problem. That is a big problem, because they only think about being re-elected. They don't think about the problems of the people. So I think the whole world wants a better quality of politics. Every little success in creating a better kind of politics is a winning moment for Palestine. Every time we fail in doing it is a winning moment for Israel and its policies of oppression. So I think that there is a global Palestine issue here that I believe in human beings. I believe that history is cyclic, not linear. I think we are at the end of a very bad cycle in history. And Gaza is part of that bad cycle. But there will be a different cycle. It depends on us, of course. I'm not deterministic, but I think it's possible. And I think that we will see revolutions in the Arab world. We will see change of political behavior in the essence of politics. Unfortunately, this will take time. And our greatest problem, and here I'm not talking as an historian, I'm talking as an activist, that I can see the change for the better happening, but it's very slow. And the destruction on the ground is very quick. And I think our role as activists is to find a way of narrowing the gap between the change that is positive so that it would be as quick as the change that Israel creates on the ground. Because Israel is not going to stop in the Gaza Strip. It would move to the West Bank. It would occupy parts of Lebanon, of Syria. We are facing an Israeli political elite that is messianic, that is very religious, very fanatic, and they haven't finished their job by just what they're doing in Gaza. So we need to find a quicker way of convincing our politicians, if not because of moral issues, let them at least think that from an electoral point of view, it is better to stand by the Palestinians than to continue to give Israel total immunity for its destruction of Palestine and the Palestinians. Thank you.
We are coming to the end of your exposition, and I do believe we'll have time for some questions. But I'd like to ask you one thing. You said that everyone knows what the solution is. Could you... Ai, desculpa.
You should speak in Portuguese.
Ai, desculpa. Falhou. Aqui, ó, não virei a chave. Ele me levou na conversa, né? Desculpem. Então, reduzindo aqui o preâmbulo, eu queria então perguntar, você falou que, sim, todo mundo sabe qual a resposta de como trazer uma mudança para melhor na Palestina, mas será que você poderia ser mais específico? Eu não sei se todos sabem qual que é a chave a ser virada para conseguirmos uma mudança, o fim do genocídio.
I think that the world at large, and the West in particular, has the power to send Israel a message through sanctions, through real actions of boycott, of taking Israel out of the United Nations, even doing 50% of what they are doing to Russia. That would at least create a different reality in Israel as far as its immediate actions against the Palestinians. This is possible. Israel is violating every law in the book of international law. So there is a legitimate legal right to do this, but there is a fear to do this. Sorry. I'm not saying that the outside would decide what should be the future. I'm just saying that the outside can create the conditions. That's the first thing. The second thing, which is very important, especially for people in the West, but also maybe elsewhere, is to change the disc. And finally, after 140 years, to say that let's first listen to the Palestinians and ask them what would they like Palestine to be if it is not colonized, if it is not occupied. How do they see the millions of Jews who live there now in the future? How do they see their connection to the Arab world? And then we can respond to it. Until this very moment, the Palestinians were always asked to respond to ideas of so-called peace coming from Israel or the United States or Europe. And I think this, you will find out, is something would also encourage the Palestinians to get rid of some of the less productive or let's say less positive members of their political elite, create a new political elite that the young generation wants to do anyway. And from what I understand, they have a vision that I can totally identify with. This is not the two-state solution. The vision is of a Palestine that is one country, a free country from the river to the sea, where Jews, Muslims, and Christians can live together as they used to live together before 1948, which is organically connected to Syria, to Lebanon, to Jordan, to Egypt. We have to return Palestine to its natural, organic place. It will be part of the problems of the Arab world, but it will also be part of the solution for the Arab world. Now, I know a lot of Israeli Jews may not like this vision. A lot of white people in South Africa did not like the idea of living in a non-apartheid South Africa. And some of them left. This is not a good enough reason not to wish for a democratic Palestinian state all over historical Palestine. And maybe a lot of Israeli Jews who are now afraid of this vision would find it much better to live in freedom, because if you are in the prison, if you are the warden, if you are the jailer, you are as much in the prison as the prisoners. So that can also release them. And I will finish by saying, you know, I was in South Africa in 2014, and every white person I met told me I was against apartheid. So I said, if you all were against apartheid, why did it take so long to bring it down? So I hope that a lot of people in Israel who are now Zionists and believe that they have an absolute right may think that their homeland should be ruled and governed in a much more equal, democratic, and decolonized way.
Bom, vamos abrir para perguntas, mas aí eu queria a ajuda da produção para saber como que a gente faz isso. A gente está com as perguntas aqui, né? Elas estão chegando para você. Não, aqui não tem nenhuma. Entendi. Agora sim. Muito bem. Então, temos a primeira pergunta da Yara Frateschi. O senhor poderia falar sobre as razões econômicas do silêncio europeu diante do genocídio palestino? As razões econômicas do silêncio europeu diante do genocídio.
Yes, the economic reasons are important as well. Europe is the biggest trade partner with Israel. And therefore, of course, sanctioning Israel or confronting Israel can affect those part of the European economy which benefit from its economic investment and connection to Israel. Particularly important in the economic field are the security and securitization industry, the arms industry. Israel provides a lot of the weapons for the European countries and develops weapons together. And what is really alarming is that the European military industry is not ashamed to say that the Israeli weapons are good because they are being experimented in real time on the people of Palestine. This is unacceptable, but that's economic, capitalist economy for you today. So I think there is an economic, but I'm a political economist. I don't believe you can separate the economic interest from the ideological interest, from the political interest, but definitely Israel at least seemed to be a good investment. Because of the economic crisis that the last 2 years created, it is possible. So a lot of people in Europe, Israel would not be a good investment anymore because the economic crisis in Israel is very, very deep and they have very little way out of it. So maybe, if not for moral reasons, for economic reasons, some European politicians would be a bit more willing to pressure Israel.
Obrigada. O recente reconhecimento do Estado palestino pela França, é pergunta anônima, desculpa. O recente reconhecimento do Estado palestino pela França e a manifestação da Grã-Bretanha de também reconhecer está no caminho certo para a solução do conflito?
It is indeed for people like me and maybe quite a lot of you who are maybe active for Palestine. It's a complicated issue, the recognition of Palestine. On the one hand, it can be interpreted as recognizing what today is called the State of Palestine, which is 16% of the West Bank, run by the Palestinian Authority, which is not Palestine, which is not a solution for Palestine, and is also part of the old idea that is not relevant anymore, to my mind, of the two-state solution. But on the other hand, in this particular historical timing, I think it's good to encourage governments to recognize Palestine, because the current Israeli political elite is determined to wipe out Palestine as an idea, as a history, as a nation, as a country. And the recognition, even if it's not meant to be as such, the recognition at least recognizes that Palestine still exists, that the Palestinians still exist. It's the right move, but it's a very small move that needs to be followed. And the most important move for the Europeans in particular, and the Americans, but not only, is to understand that their role in history is not to mediate between Arabs and Jews. Europe sees itself as offering mediation. No, the only historical role Europe has, because of its historical complicity, is to defend the Palestinians. That is the only role Europe has, to defend the Palestinians, because the Palestinians are under the danger of extinction. And this is something that even here the government in Brazil has to understand, because Brazil also talks about the two-state solution. I think politicians don't understand how this idea is old, irrelevant to the reality on the ground, and that we need to think that we are facing a colonialist project, even if we are talking about 2025, which is not easy to accept. I understand it. But that's the best way to begin to understand how to move forward in the future. So it's a small step. It's an important step. It's by no means enough to defend the Palestinians and create the conditions that finally would stop the suffering of these people that have been under colonialism, ethnic cleansing, and genocide for more than 140 years. It's time for them to enjoy life as so many other people in the world enjoy, just normal life, free life, and make it the mission of everyone who is interested in them, because what happens to them affects all of us around the world.
Outra pergunta anônima. Você falou em ouvir o palestino para saber o que ele vislumbra do futuro, mas com o governo palestino dividido desde 2006 entre a autoridade palestina e o Hamas na faixa de Gaza, até pouco tempo, para onde nos voltamos para ouvir a voz palestina?
This is indeed the responsibility of the Palestinians to find a way of overcoming the disunity, the fragmentation, the lack of authentic representation. Definitely, it's not. This is something that only the Palestinians can do. But when you listen to the younger Palestinian generation, and the Palestinians are the youngest people in the world, wherever they are, more than 50% of the Palestinians are under the age of 20. And if you listen to the younger generation, they have the energy, the wish to build a different kind of Palestinian organization, of representation. So I think that in due course, there will be a clear Palestinian voice, but it's very good to be prepared for this, because so many years the Palestinians, when they were united during the time of the PLO in the 1960s and the 1970s, during the time of the Palestinian Congresses, during the time of the Mandate, they were not listened to, they were totally ignored, and therefore, of course, it's up to them to find a way of representing for us a clear vision for the future. But we should say clearly to them, your vision for the future is our vision for the future. Whatever you decide, we will support you, because this is the genuine meaning of solidarity. We don't tell you what you should think. We ask you, what can we do for you to fulfill your dreams of freedom, independence, and liberation?
Muito obrigada, Ilan Pappe. Muito obrigada, Ilan Pappe, por essa brilhante exposição, por essa prazerosíssima conversa. Muito obrigada a todos que participaram e à própria Flip.